Welcome to another episode of Alt Swift X, where we drink and we know things. Because today we are reading the first Tyrion chapter, the chapter that introduces us to Tyrion Lannister. And the chapter begins with a description of Winterfell, the great stone maze of Winterfell, and a wolf howling. So Tyrion right now is reading some books. It's almost morning. He's been reading all night. And he's been reading some century-old book about the changing of the seasons. So Tyrion is quite into sort of academia, sort of fusty old books about the old mysteries and histories and such. That's kind of an interest of Tyrion's, which doesn't appear much in the show. Tyrion isn't shown to be much of a reader, but in the books it's emphasized that he does love reading and learning, a bit like Samwell Tarly. So anyway, he's been reading and he's hearing this wolf howling, and there's this sort of background of this sort of ominous, mysterious, mystical Winterfell stuff. But he's having a read. And he's sort of done reading, so he decides to sort of stand up and go. And it talks about his legs that are stiff and sore and twisted and bent because he's a dwarf. His body is inferior and messed up in all these ways, and so it's painful and uncomfortable for him. And this is sort of repeated throughout this chapter and many in the future. There's always this underlying sort of discomfort for Tyrion. And so he talks to a maester who's there at the sort of Winterfell library and blah blah blah. And Tyrion goes outside into the morning and he encounters everyone's favorite doggo, Sandor Clegane, who who makes a callous remark about Bran Stark, who is currently bedridden and crippled, all fucked up in 15 different ways after falling from the broken tower. And Sandor makes a comment saying, I wish he'd bloody hurry up dying. And then Joffrey, the good Prince Joffrey, everyone's favourite monarch Joffrey, makes a similarly callous comment saying, well, at least Bran dies quietly. The bloody wolf, Bran's wolf Summer, is making a lot of noise, because Bran's direwolf Summer has been howling all night, while Bran has been bedridden, which has been disturbing the people of Winterfell. But of course it also alludes to the sort of mystical connection that the direwolves have with the Stark children. It's emphasized quite a lot throughout this chapter. But what's being emphasized right now is that Sandor Clegane and Joffrey, quote-unquote, Baratheon, are cunts. They're both being set up as really pretty complete twats in most sense. Quite irredeemable is how they sort of seem. Joffrey, of course, kind of stays that way. We only really hate Joffrey more as time goes on. Sandor, on the other hand, we do learn a lot more about as a character. It's hard to imagine now, though, when he's just this sort of brutal warrior making these rude, unpleasant, harsh comments. And then Tyrion comes in and he sort of sets his nephew Joffrey to rights by sort of telling him not to be rude and a prick. And Sandor sort of makes fun of him. Sandor the Hound sort of goes, he does some slapstick. He's like, who's talking there? Who? And he does this sort of dumb joke where he's pretending that he can't see Tyrion because Tyrion's so short. And Sandor's like, oh, is it a ghost talking? I can't see who's talking. And it's, which is kind of a goofy moment. You can see why they didn't include that in the show, I guess. But yeah, Sandor apparently sort of regularly makes a mockery of Tyrion in a sort of goofy way, when he doesn't do that stuff in the show. So they sort of chop some banter around, and the point is that Tyrion is telling Joffrey, yo, Joffrey, you need to go express your concern over Bran's condition to the Starks. And Joffrey's like, oh, but I'm fucking Joffrey, and I don't give a flying fuck. And Tyrion's like, here's your flying fuck, and he slaps him across the face which is done like word for word in the show. And then Joffrey's like, oh, but I still don't give a fuck. And then Tyrion fucking backhands him across the fucking princely jaw. And Joffrey, the little shit, just sort of, oh, I'm going to tell mother, and runs away and whatever. Which, yeah, is quite satisfying. We haven't known Joffrey long, but it's already quite satisfying to see a little bit of physical violence, a little bit of child abuse, a little bit of princely child abuse. Is always some good fun at this point. So yeah, that happens, and then Joffrey runs off, and then Tyrion sort of addresses the Hound, and the Hound is looming over Tyrion, a great black shadow. And we get this nice little description of Sandor. Like we mentioned, Sandor's helmet, his hound face-shaped helmet, fearsome to behold. But Tyrion thinks that the helmet is an improvement over Clegane's hideously burned face. Which, in some ways kind of sums up Sandor right there, right? Like, Sandor internally is burned. He is wounded. He is in pain. He has suffered, but he puts over his pain a snarling, cruel, harsh face, a visage, a veil to hide his pain, and to instead put out an aggression to mask his inner self. That's kind of Sandor's thing, as we come to learn later. It's, I think, quite a effective and pretty symbolism. His helmet, his hound snarling helmet. But anyway, Sandor says, oh, the prince will remember you slapping him around like a little bitch, little Tyrion boy. And Tyrion's like, oh, I hope that he does. But of course, Joffrey does indeed remember Tyrion's slaps, and abuses him for much of the rest of the series. And Tyrion not only sort of is defiant to Joffrey, but he also makes a contemptuous comment towards Sandor. Tyrion, I mean, his whole thing is that he's this tiny, stunted little dwarf man who uses his high status as a way of lording it over everyone else. He is quite sort of rude to a lot of people in a very clever way, I'm sure. But I mean, he's very likable. Tyrion's very likable, but you got to admit that he's quite, he's not very nice to a lot of people. And I don't think he should be let off the hook for doing it cleverly. A clever cunt is a cunt nonetheless. I'm pretty sure Jesus said that. So anyway, so Tyrion heads off and he goes to have breakfast with his family. He sits at the table with Cersei and Jaime and the children, and Cersei looks at Tyrion with the same expression of distaste that she's worn at him since the day he was born. Cersei's so unpleasant to Tyrion all the time, is what we learn from this, whereas Jaime, we're told, is the only person who has shown Tyrion the tiniest amount of affection or respect during all the terrible long years of Tyrion's childhood, which is so depressingly sad. Jaime is like the only person in Tyrion's life who has been properly nice to him. And for that reason, Tyrion values his relationship with Jaime enormously and understandably, even though Jaime's a little bit of a twat, especially this early on. And yeah, we also sort of perhaps get a little bit of insight as to why Tyrion is the way he is. In the same way that Sandor wears a mask to disguise his inner pain, Tyrion clearly has suffered through the way people have viewed him throughout his life, and that perhaps explains some of his behavior with regards to being a clever little silver-tongued devil imp, is he? Little devil imp, is he? Monkey demon, they call him later on, I believe. And so they have breakfast, and there's quite a long description of food. There's good dark beer and burnt bacon and such. But at the dinner table, they're talking about Bran, who is currently in the process of dying, seems to be. And little Tommen Baratheon expresses, "Oh, I don't want Brandon to die." So we get a description of Tommen as a sweet boy, a nice boy, so very different to his parents, Jaime and Cersei. Myrcella as well expresses concern, and she too is a sweet girl, unlike Joffrey. So Myrcella and Tommen seem nice. And they talk a bit about Brandon Stark, Ned's brother, and how he died, and blah, 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 blah. But Tyrion points out, that Bran might actually survive. Bran might live. He might survive the fall from the tower. That's what the maesters say. And then a glance passes between the eyes of Cersei and Jaime, and Tyrion doesn't miss it. Tyrion is sharp. He's perceptive, and he notices that Jaime and Cersei seem to be taking an odd interest in Bran's recovery, which Tyrion is immediately suspicious of. And yeah, descriptions of Myrcella and blah, blah, blah. And we also have a description of how Bran's wolf Summer has been howling outside the room and all that, and Tyrion specifically notes that the direwolf's been howling through the open window, and it seems to make Bran stronger, the direwolf, because when they shut the window and chased the wolf away, Bran got weaker, but when the wolf is closer and howling to Bran gets stronger. So Bran is definitely exhibiting this mysterious, mystical connection with the direwolf that is bonded to him. You also have got to wonder, perhaps, if there might be some kind of involvement from Bloodraven, the three-eyed crow, who, of course, has been tinkering around in Bran's little brain box for some time. I mean, perhaps not yet, but you got to wonder if perhaps Bloodraven might be involved in Summer's behavior, the direwolf's behavior, and perhaps in Bran's recovery. Bloodraven has been pulling some strings from his lair far beyond the wall. Quite the puppet master is Bloodraven. And yeah, so we've established that mystical sort of connection thing. And so Cersei and Jaime and the king and Ned and all that, they're all going to head south. But Tyrion tells them that he's actually going to stay in the north. He's actually going to go further north. He wants to go check out the wall. So Tyrion is doing a bit of tourism here. Tyrion really has this life of leisure. He does. He's reading all these books that he finds interesting. He's drinking and eating to his heart's content and making all these wry comments to all the people around him. And now he's going to the wall simply because he wants to piss off the edge of the world. So Tyrion is certainly making the most of his status and his money and having a grand old time, which is somewhat in contrast to what he experiences later. So yeah, he tells him that, and Cersei storms off, and Jaime has a chat with Tyrion alone, and Jaime comments about Bran. Oh, it'd be better if Bran was just put to death, if he was just killed. It would be a mercy killing, because Bran is crippled, his legs are all fucked up, he's a cripple, a grotesque, give me a good, clean death any day. Which is a very, very portentous statement from Jaime, given that not too far later he is to have his hand chopped off by Vargo Coat, made a sort of a cripple himself, given quite the opposite of a good, clean death. And yet Jaime soldiers on regardless, and arguably becomes a far better person for it. So a sort of ironic foreshadowing there from Jaime. And of course Tyrion defends cripples, bastards, and broken things. As a grotesque myself, he begs to differ. He says that death is so very final, while life is full of possibilities, which is a wonderful line. Tyrion is probably easily the most quotable of Game of Thrones characters, because he may not be able to run, he may not be able to fight, he may not be able to stand above 5 feet, but he can issue a scathing or quite insightful line every now and then. And Tyrion makes this sort of loaded comment about, I'd be interested to hear what Bran would have to say if he woke up, because he's noting this suspicious behavior from Jaime and Cersei, and Jaime kind of acknowledges that, saying, oh, Tyrion, whose side are you on here? So he's kind of admitting that there are sort of secrets and shit at play. Like, Tyrion doesn't know that Jaime pushed Bran out, but he clearly suspects some kind of shenaniganry. The shenaniganry meter is approaching 8, which is quite high on that particular meter, but he says, oh, whose side are you on? And then Tyrion, he swallows a thing of great black beer and washes it down, and then grins, because of course we've got to use food as a way of communicating the tone of Tyrion's speech. But the point is that Tyrion's like, oh, well, you know me. I wouldn't bet against my family. You know how much I love my family. And with that, the chapter ends. So that was a cool chapter. We're introduced to Tyrion, who is certainly one of the most likable and interesting of the Game of Thrones characters. He's not a moper like bloody Jon or Arya, but he does have a difficult past, and he's smart and he's perceptive and he notices things that advance the plot, and yet he doesn't know so much as to make things, too boring. And of course he's a Lannister and he's involved in the politics of what's going on. He's always very close to the action, Tyrion is. There's always lots going on in Tyrion chapters, except perhaps for the dance ones, where he spends rather a lot of time depressed on a boat, which, we could do in our own time. If we wanted naval depression, I'm sure that could be arranged. Well, boats are expensive. Look, the point is that was a chapter. That was in a book. It had some words in it, and I think we enjoyed it. So thank you for listening to this particular episode of Alt Shrift X's Game of Thrones Abridged, and we'll be back soon with more episodes shortly. Cheers.